Welcome to the very first Lightline of 2022. And those of you who would like to put on your cameras, please do. It's great to see your smiling faces. We're going to have a beautiful time here for at least an hour. This is a really sweet experience in terms of getting our spiritual community together to share in this guidance and to share in some grace. So great to see you guys. You can turn your cameras on if you can. For those of you who are new to my guidance and new to these virtual events, we started them a couple of years ago in response to the pandemic and really as a tangible means of support for the spiritual community, for all of us that are spiritual seekers, needing to check in, needing to connect. And to that point, tonight we're covering a really juicy topic. It's a really beautiful theme that's close to my heart. It's about living from the inside out, self-transformation, and nervous system laxity, which sounds like a clinical term, but it's really not so clinical. So we're going to discuss a lot of great principles that relate to that whole aspect of living from the inside out. For the first half, I'll share those insights with you guys. And then we'll shift over to specific questions that you may have about your spiritual path or about these insights in particular, about these understandings. So you may want to take notes, and I encourage you to consider putting your phones away and trying to minimize distractions for about an hour. That's a gift to self, and it connects us and brings us close to the present here. So speaking of living from the inside out, we're going to start with an understanding that most of us live from the outside in. We're going to start with that perspective. And when I say the outside in, think of it in this way, that we're often very identified with all the information that's coming through our senses. It makes sense, right? We're plugged into our five senses. So everything we're seeing, we're hearing, we're smelling, we're tasting, and we're touching is informing our life experience. And we call that our life. And it is our life. But it's the life from the outside in. From the inside out, we're talking about a life that's different. It's a different orientation. So if we were living from the outside in, you would recognize that the typical way of life, outside in, you would recognize that you're familiar with who you are in terms of your name, rank, and serial number. You're familiar with who you are in terms of your context and your culture and your career and your social connections and your purpose, your interests and all of that. But there's a lot more to you than that identification, than that labeling. And somehow we really know that intuitively. Somehow we're just really subtly aware that there's a greater picture here and there's so much more to who we are. I mean, an absolute universe is what we are, but we're relating to ourselves as less than an asteroid. So in that sense, we're kind of like water skimmers on a lake. You know, most of us are just sort of skimming on the surface there and going, yeah, that's our grand existence. So the whole of our reality tends to be defined by those five senses. And the quality of our lives is determined by how empowered we are. And that empowerment is constructed by the kind of choices we make. So the spiritual process is about becoming familiar with the self that is unchanging and for most of us very unfamiliar. So in that sense, we want to understand that if we're living just from the nerve endings, if we're living just from the surface out, then we're looking for ourselves in the wrong place. We're looking for the soul. We're looking for the true self in the wrong place, which is always external rather than internal. So we want to get really good at self-referencing. That's the starting point for us. And when I say self-referencing, I'm talking about transitioning from a kind of surface orientation in life to depth perception, actually. Think of it like going from the perspective that a snorkeler would have on the ocean, with just a snorkel mask and the fins, and then they're looking down, to the perspective that you would have if you were diving. And it takes it out of the abstract. And we are diving. We're diving into the self, past the senses, past the heavy identifications of who we think we are and how we think we are. And understanding that in this process, a key component of that is, just to begin, a key component of that is to recognize that your thoughts and feelings are not who you are. They're how you are. Okay? We often completely miss that boat because we've become so entangled and so enamored of those thoughts and feelings. Lately, I find myself, when I'm doing my spiritual coaching and my spiritual empowerment sessions, which has been really exciting and just a brand new path for me in terms of guidance, and you guys seem to be loving it too, so it's been beautiful. And in these sessions, I talk about a lot of things, but I encourage people to not romance their worries, to not romance their suffering, to not romance the thoughts that keep them awake at night. Because as soon as we link on to our suffering, and as soon as we link into all of the things that are bugging us and place our attention on it, place our energy towards it, we're bonding ourselves to it. And our focus really determines our reality, because we're very subjective beings in an objective world. So what we want to shift from is kind of a grasping state to gratitude. And like I talk about in my new book, Expand Your Spiritual Bandwidth, life's not a grab bag, it's a gift bag. It's a gift. It's a total gift. And yet, if we're stuck in the rearview mirror in terms of our vision and our perception is based in what's happened, or if we're romancing those worries and those thoughts and those concerns excessively, and there's a difference between problem solving and romancing our problems. So if we're doing that, then we tend to be in that state of attachment, that state of grasping. And I think that the way to start gaining ground, to start getting traction forward, is to consider that we still have to do things. We still have to create. We still want to, in other words, be animated human beings and be effectual in the world and be powerful and do our best at making a difference, making a change in the world. That's fine. We want to do. It's not about just closing up shop and sitting in a cave in the Himalayas somewhere. But here's the shift. We can do from a state of being instead of being from a state of doing. And it's a phenomenal reversal. And if we take the words out of the surface, if you will, if you take them beyond the surface and consider that being is the subject, then the doing happens naturally. And the doing happens from a place of coherence, a place of ease, a place of fun. And actually a sense of play is also part of the prescription. And we're going to get more into that. So consider that, well, just as Lao Tzu said, the great Chinese philosopher, nothing in nature hurries, yet everything gets accomplished. So there's plenty of doing in nature. The whole planet and the cosmos is busier than busy, busier than we can comprehend. But what we can do is seed into beingness. And it reminds me of the this sacred quote that's from the yogic culture, where Krishna is informing Arjuna, his student. He's saying, okay, first establish yourself in yoga and then act. He's not telling, Krishna's not telling Arjuna that he has to do a downward facing dog or a lotus pose or something. He means yoga in the sense of union, which is really what that word implies. It's what that word means across the board. That's the definition of it, is union. And union with what? Union with the all, union with the greater self and the greater being that you are, which is way beyond your story and way beyond your thoughts and your feelings. And if we were to do from a state of being, then we start recognizing that our thoughts become informed by that being and our actions become informed by that being. So there are what I like to refer to as twin engines of transformation. There's these two engines, just like in a jet plane, that are going to sail us into the friendly skies here. Okay. So those two twin engines respectively are intention and attention. And the latter is in kind of a dwindling supply lately. It's a little bit of a rare commodity, attention. It seems to get spent haphazardly, unconsciously. We dole out a lot of attention without thinking about how powerful that phenomenon is, how powerful that force is. Attention is the prime mover in our lives. And as it's been said by so many teachers and so many beautiful wisdom cultures, where our attention is, that's where our energy, that's where our life force, that's where our prana is going. So attention is a very, very valuable commodity. And it's great to remember that. So intention and attention, well, the directionality that's implied in those two words informs you as to what they are. So think of it this way. The attention, the first two letters are at, so it's related to focusing externally. And we know this, but it's really good to get clear on this concept. It's at something. It's outward bound. Intention is an internal command, and it's a coordinate that you set, basically. The intention is where you're steering your life based in your volition and based in your soul's consciousness. It's awareness. So that intention is one prime mover and the attention is the other. And we can consider those the main agents of transformation. So if you intend to evolve, if you intend to have a richer sense of life, if you intend to live from the inside out, that's what's going to happen. Mark my words. Now you have to really intend it. You can't just say, yeah, I intend to live from the inside out. But you become more distracted by the outside in. Like a child in a carnival, walking around and being blitzed by all the lights and all the sounds and the cotton candy and the rides and all of the visual stimulus, all of the auditory stimulus, all of the sensory overload. That's how we kind of go through life a lot of times. And again, the repositioning of a human being is to consider that all of your experience and all that you know is happening from within yourself. It's not happening from outside. So the self-referencing I'm talking about relates to, first and foremost, if we're going to find this self and live from the inside out, we have to go where it is. Doesn't that make sense? So we're not necessarily going to look for it outside. We're going to look for it inside. And that's a very ancient theme. That's a very ancient suggestion, holy suggestion from the masters and the wise ones, that what we are looking for is inside of us. Now, how come we all know that intellectually? We all know that 6 ways to Sunday above our shoulders, but where we need to know it And how we need to know it is behind the breastbone. It's in our hearts. We need to understand, oh, it's in here? Yeah, that might be the last place we're actually looking for it. So, as spiritual seekers, most of the time, the greatest challenge is making space to receive grace, making space and creating an availability so your attention and your intention can be seated into beingness. So you make space for yourself. You make space for your inner practices. It's more than half the battle. And people often feel like, oh, I can't seem to find time for the inner practices. You're not going to find time for it. You're not going to find time for it. You have to make time for it. You have to make time for it. Now, when I say have to, it's only if that's your intention. That's what you really want. If you don't want it, then that's fine. It's still there. But if you want to reference that grace and that divinity that's inside of you, which really is the storehouse of bliss, the storehouse of joy, the storehouse of love, it's everything we're really wanting in life is within ourselves. So it makes sense to give some time to it, to make space for that. And you want to feed your spirit the same way, take time to feed your spirit the same way you take time to feed your body. Most of us in the modern world carve out a little time at three junctures in the day to feed our bodies. So I don't think it's beyond a modern citizen's capacity to check in with your heart and to check in with your spirit at some point during the day, And that means we have to get good at creating a type of hermetic seal in our lives. What does that mean? So that's the interest for shutting out the noise of the circus and shutting out the distractions of and demands of daily life, just for a time, just for a very limited time, a very limited space. Many of us think in terms of all or nothing. In my experience, if we live on the basis of all or nothing, mostly what we get is nothing, not the all. And the reason I say all or nothing and mention that is because oftentimes it's like, well, I don't know if I have an hour to meditate. Well, you don't need an hour. I don't know if I have 2 hours to practice yoga. I don't know if I have 3 hours to go on a silent retreat. You have 3 minutes, then you can have a reconnaissance meditation. You can get in touch with yourself. And tonight I'll give you guys several takeaways that are going to relate to an easing of that process. In other words, to make the nervous system more receptive to quieting. Because we have 3 main ingredients here, okay? We have our attention, we have our intention, and the third ingredient that I'm mentioning now is quieting, aka meditation. That's the word that tends to have a tremendous amount of interpretation, and it means different things to different people. But essentially, when we're talking about living from the inside out, we want to get good at quieting. And it's fine to recognize, in fact, it's excellent to recognize that you may not feel good at quieting. You may not feel like you have the capacity to really withdraw your attention from the drama and distance yourself from your drama and all of the concerns and the dramas that are happening within the senses of your body and what's happened in past years that still haunts you and all of that. But see, you don't have to be confident about this to engage the process because it's very self-regulating. You make time for yourself. You make space for yourself, your heart, for your true self. The next thing you know, you remember. You come into a really pristine remembrance of like, oh, yeah, this is what's important. In other words, you won't be defined by your doing. You won't be limited to understanding yourself just as a human doing, but you will actually perceive palpably your sense of being a human being, and you'll celebrate that. And in being in touch with that, well, that's when the perspective self-regulates and you find that you become more confident, that you can dial down the distraction and you can dial down the sense of being disturbed by your thoughts and emotions. So the big dynamic we're considering today, that I'm considering in teaching with you guys, is that, boy, we get to a fork in the road. As soon as we start this process of saying, okay, I intend to evolve, I intend to have an inner life, I'm going to show up to that inner life. Amazon's not going to deliver it. You have to show up to it. It has to be something that you say, okay, I'm yearning for this. I feel unfulfilled. Where are you going to find that fulfillment? You're going to find it within yourself. The big dynamic from that point forward is that you have two aspects, a dynamic, two opposing forces. One aspect that is completely oppositional is resistance. Okay? Sound familiar? So resistance is a state of inertia. It's a state of kind of psychic inertia, energetic inertia, where we are neither receiving nor releasing. We're just in the netherworld. And it doesn't feel good. But it's also informative on the path because that resistance keeps telling you you're not quite where you want to be. And it doesn't feel quite right. It doesn't feel like you're right in the groove, like you're in the sweet spot of life. When we're in resistance, we know something's up. So there's a tension in the air. So that's resistance. We're familiar with it. Now, if we were to take our foot off the brake and release that resistance, what would that be? What does that look like? That's surrender. Okay, so surrender is a term that is making the rounds in our spiritual community. You know, it's talked about quite a lot. It's talked about from the rooftops, which is great. But for clarity's sake, consider that surrender is not, we're so entrained and we're so conditioned to see surrender as defeat. It's not defeat. Surrender is not defeat. Surrender is not giving up. Surrender is not going passive. Surrender is getting out of your own way. So it's a big deal because we have resistance on one hand. These are like the lions that's the lion actually that's guarding the temple gate. And the password is surrender to be able to enter that inner sanctum. So when I was fortunate to study with two Native American spiritual teachers, I had two incredible experiences that some of you guys know about. Many times I've thought of a way to try to distill all that, like in a 5-second soundbite. What did I learn out of 9 years of apprenticeship, if I add it together? And I came away with this interesting alchemical formula, and the formula is, and I will tell you, but let me back that up just a sec. So when I say alchemical formula, what I'm suggesting is that I didn't actually learn this from Sun Bear and Sparrow Eagle, my teachers. They didn't sit down and say, hey, this is the formula. But when I downloaded all of that experience and all of the ritual and the sweat lodges and the chanting and all of the incessant prayer, it came down in my understanding to a fusion of 3 phenomenal aspects. And these phenomenal aspects are that alchemical formula. Okay, so here, the first one's going to sound familiar. Intention, sincerity, and focus. Now, those are 3 mighty ingredients. Mighty. But here's the thing. They really are alchemical. the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. If you fuse focus, if you're not only non-distracted, but actively focused, we're back to attention again, attention, and you fuse it to intention, the internal command to live your existence and show up to your life and to embrace your existence with passion. Wow. And then you tie focus into that. So I think of it as like, okay, the intention sets the GPS and you're driving, but your focus and your sincerity is what keeps you in your lane. So when we talk, coming back to surrender, okay, another great thing to consider with surrender is, in terms of the spiritual path, how can I get past my surrender? How can I get past my resistance, rather? Resistance on the spiritual path. How can I get past it? Well, if we can reframe the whole undertaking, the whole intention and attention pathway from responsibility and obligation. See, somehow in the gray matter, for most of us, when we consider our spiritual path, we think, oh, I haven't meditated enough and I should be so much farther along than I am. And why can't I seem to stop my monkey mind? And on it goes with this vicious critique, okay? So there is a subtle yet insidious subconscious belief that this is arduous. This is responsibility. This is obligation. Like, I got to do this. Okay. So let me help you dismantle that construction by reframing your perspective. Reframe your perspective from I have to do this to I get to do this. I want to do this. And believe me, it's a magical transformation. It's like you've decided to dance at the party. You're not being dragged out to the dance floor or drug out to the dance floor. You've decided to dance, and the willingness is the greatest component in terms of our evolution, spiritually and human potential. The willingness is the secret ingredient. So once you reframe the path towards that end, you're off and running. So you get to, and you reframe responsibility to opportunity. And it is an opportunity. So I suggest, in terms of focus, we want to understand that there is, we carry around these little weapons of mass distraction, I like to say. And like it or not, they're a necessary device or a necessary accoutrement in the world. But yet we have these disturbing aspects, this fallout that's happening. And one term that is being tossed about out there in the circles of our culture is a term called digital dementia. And such a thing is actually happening, where people are in overload with the rapidity of change and technology in our world. And that's an altogether different subject. But I did want to touch on it in terms of focus, because focus is a limited commodity. We have a bandwidth of about 110 bits per second of attention. And as you listen to me and sharing this guidance and this teaching, it takes about 60 bits of your attention per second to keep up with it. So imagine if you're trying to do all the other things and multitask that we typically do in life, we become fragmented. So what we don't want to do is race right past our lives. We don't want to be unfocused, but we also don't want to be in sixth gear looking for overdrive. And when I'm talking about racing, I mean racing past the present moment, racing past serenity, racing past sensuality, sensing, feeling, and racing past soulfulness. See, it's definitely not a race. We don't want to just cut to the chase and get to the end here. Because, well, the beauty is in the journey that we're in. And what I mean by that is that it's not about the beginning and it's not about the end. It's about the middle. It's about the continuum, rather, not even the middle, but the continuum of experience from showing up here on the planet as you and getting to be somebody. You get to be somebody. You get to be in a body, and you get to decide who you're going to be and how you're going to be. So we'll shift over to some aspects that can move you into more of this nervous system laxity bit that I want to cover. Because the thing is, our nervous system doesn't have to be so nervous. You know, it's like, in fact, the nervous system is designed to be at ease most of the time, unless there's a survival element at play and we have to really press go and escape danger. Other than that, the nervous system likes to exist in a plane of homeostasis and balance. So I'm going to offer over a few takeaways before we get to the questions for this that can help you guys in terms of that nervous system laxity. We'll start with this first one, which is interesting. Most of you have probably heard about the vagus nerve, which is considered the 10th cranial nerve, I believe. This is not really my wheelhouse, but I love to incorporate self-regulation into this path of empowerment. So speaking of that, the vagus nerve is not just one nerve, but it's actually two, coming down from the cranium and the back of the neck. And it controls that autonomic nervous system. So it basically has everything to do with our breathing and digestion and our heartbeat, all those really vital functions. So one way we can start in training ourselves to greater nervous system laxity, which makes us more available to grace in meditation and quieting and focusing internally, is this vagal reset, or this vagus nerve reset. And for you guys, I recommend taking notes versus practicing it right now, because it requires laying down. So that's probably not convenient. And it's not the optimal way to show you this technique, but I'll show it to you anyhow, horizontally. So it works like this. We get our two hands interlaced, just like that. And you're laying on the floor with your knees bent, just comfortably. Back is on the floor, supine, flat, knees up. You take the interlaced hands, the fingers, put them behind your neck comfortably. So you're just resting your neck on your hands and your elbows are off to the side. And what you do from here is you start by making sure your head is straight, and you keep your head straight through the whole exercise. Okay. Again, you don't need to practice it now, but take note if you can. And then you look to the right for about 30 seconds, 30 to 45 seconds. You look to the right, eyes pan to the right, and they stay to the right. And your nose is straight, your head's centered, your nose is up towards the ceiling, eyes to the right for 30 to 45 seconds. Then you bring them back to center, relax, eyes open, relax. And when you're ready, pan your eyes to the left for 30 to 45 seconds. And then back to the center. So it's super simple. To recap, you're on your back, you've got your head straight, you don't move your head at all, to keep your head straight. Eyes to the right for 30 to 45 seconds. When you're finished that, eyes to the left for 30 to 45 seconds, and then back to the middle. And when you do this vagal reset, it has an effect. Researchers suggest that this resets the baseline of trauma in the amygdala and the hindbrain, the back brain, the hind part. So what that means is we become less, in a simplistic sense, we're less affected by the the stored trauma and the stored sensations of adapting to trauma. And there's a reset in terms of helping the nervous system relax its guardedness or tension from past trauma. And as you do this exercise, you may notice that you want to swallow or that you let out several sighs. That's all part of the vagal reset. So enjoy that. That's something to really get you going. Now, the other one that I work with, I have to reach down here, is in my book, Expand Your Spiritual Bandwidth. I'm proud to say this is our baby that released last year, and I hope you guys are enjoying it. It's my gift to the world, and my life's work is basically at heart there in terms of those 14 different strategies that empower people. So in reference to that, inside Expand Your Spiritual Bandwidth is within those 14 chapters is a 5th chapter or strategy that's called Become Inspired by Breath. And one of those techniques that's in that chapter relates to this particular breath, box breathing technique, this breath technique. We consider it the beginner's big breath. I don't know why I called it that. It's just kind of an arbitrary thing. But it's essentially a beautiful technique that's taught to military personnel. It's taught to high pressure corporate executives, really kind of emotionally fierce environments, and with the objective of dialing down the sympathetic nervous system and ramping up the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest system. And that's the system that helps us chill, that helps us rest, that helps us restore. So the 4-7-8 beginner's big breath works like this. We inhale to the count of 4 through the nose. We hold that count to the count of 7. Okay. So 4 actually to inhale through the nose. And then 7 to hold. So you're holding the breath for 7 counts. And then 7. 7 to hold, and then 8 to exhale through the mouth. So we have 4 through the nose, 7 to hold, and 8 exhale through the mouth. Count of 4 in, count of 7 to hold, count of 8 to exhale through the mouth. And you cycle that breath for 2 or 3 minutes at a time. It's breathing, so you can do as much or as little of it as you like, but it's optimal to do several minutes at a go. And I recommend doing it a couple times a day at least. And the third aspect that I want to cover, and then we're going to jump right to questions, is I'm going to give it to you in a nutshell version or a thumbnail sketch version because we have a limited context today. And when we have longer events or longer teaching programs, we'll get further into this. But when I talked about focus and racing and being on edge and having sensory overwhelm, I think a lot of that will sound familiar to all of us in the modern world. Now, one of the adaptations that we have as people, as humans, is when we are bombarded by stimuli, we tend to narrow our focus. We tend to draw in and have, like, similar to the portrait mode on your phone, we tend to zero in and say, hey, what's that? I just heard a big bang over there. Or is that the baby crying? And we zero in with this kind of laser focus. And in so doing, if you observe that phenomenon, your consciousness tends to get, it tends to get diminished. It tends to get shrunk into about the size of a dime. So the counter to that is the exact opposite, to create what I refer to as an omnifocus, a 360 focus, or what's known in the human potential fields and neuroscience fields as a divergent focus, instead of a convergent focus where we're just focusing in on, hey, what's that? What does that person need from me? What are they safe? Are they? Is it okay to get near them, or this, that, or the other? Instead of having that emergency response and just zeroing in to the pinhole focus, we're going to broaden it. We're going to open our focus. So I recommend practicing this throughout the day, and especially when you're outside, instead of just like, say, if you're pushing a shopping cart, instead of just looking at what's in front of you, of course, watch where you're going, but adopt some awareness about what's around you. Now, here's the interesting part, not necessarily physically. You don't have to have eyes in the back of your head, but you want to open up your perception in terms of sensing beyond your body. Because when we're in stress, we focus on three main aspects, and that's time, our bodies, and the environment. And we tend to get a little overamped in terms of, again, that super narrow focus. So if you practice the omnifocus, it means that you take time throughout your day to just sense around you, to sense the fullness of the room, beyond the room. I love practicing it outside and outdoors, and I'll look at the clouds or the trees. And either eyes open or eyes closed, it doesn't matter. And especially if you're taking, like, say, a 20-minute walk and you practice being aware and extending your awareness farther and farther beyond your body, you're actually going to notice great brain changes and changes in your nervous system laxity. It will really upgrade that aspect of your life. So great. I'm going to shift over to questions for you guys, and whoever's first is up. Let me get you guys. And you can unmute yourself. Whoever wants to unmute can start with a question, please. Hey there. Don't be bashful. This is our time, and it goes quick. So it's wonderful to have you guys.
Hi, Charlie. What a wonderful conversation to start out this new year, a new phase, a new time, new paradigm.
It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, so you mentioned the vagus nerve, and that's not your wheelhouse. It actually is my wheelhouse. Working with trauma and grief, and I'm so glad you mentioned it, but I wanted to add to what you said.
Sure.
So that when you're in, there's many positions that you can be in, and yoga positions and all of that, but I love the simplicity of what you were saying. But instead of making it a time thing, when you said holding here and keeping your nose upright and you're looking to one side, what you want to do is wait for your body to yawn spontaneously on its own. And that is a signal that the parasympathetic nervous system has been engaged. And I don't want to say activated, because that's the opposite of what you're trying to do in what you refer to as quieting. So
good one.
Instead of getting mental about it, like 1, 2, 3, just let your body be the guide and give you its wisdom. And what is so interesting is that most of us will hold more stress on one side than the other. And so you might get an immediate yawn on one side, and it might take a while on the other, but to just be patient with that relaxation process.
Yeah. Thanks, Joy. That's helpful. And I agree, you know, with the little bit that I understand about that particular process, that's really helpful. Anything I can help you with?
What you were talking in the beginning, and I just thought it was brilliant. I just think you're amazing.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
You just are, and I just.
But I know you got a question.
As I've been on a spiritual, my own path, it's like I start to appreciate your wisdom more and more. And especially when you described surrender as not letting go and not giving in and not being defeated, but you said, what was your big word for surrender?
Well, getting out of your own way.
Okay.
Yeah, getting out of your own way. And there may have been more aspects that the way it came to me there. But you think of surrender as the ultimate manifestation of the energy of sincerity. Okay? Because if you're sincere and you're approaching life, you're approaching divinity. And yes, you shouldn't necessarily have some fancy idea about what that is. You're just turning within. You're saying, I know there's a source of life within me. And if that's the case, then we want to approach it with utmost respect and humility. And that would mean that sincerity would be profoundly aroused. And when that sincerity is profoundly aroused and you're bringing that up from your heart, then naturally you're going to meet surrender, because surrender is more of an experience than an activity. Okay? It's more of an experience than an activity. But the activity is you yielding yourself, presenting the feminine energy to the divine. And just as you present your attention to somebody, you are yielding yourself and really bringing the greatest thing you can ever bring to somebody is your attention, right? So you're bringing your attention to life and you're saying, okay, I'm going to shut up my show here, my little dramatic show that we all have, and people love to get into it about the ego and stuff. And sure, I'm fine with that. I'm just saying that that's not really the problem. It's just that we just have that show going on and we don't ever shut it off. It's like, if I would imagine, all respect to our folks in Silicon Valley and everything, but if they had their way, I don't think we'd be able to shut off a computer or a television or anything like that. So it's sort of like that dynamic. I mean, it's not the show and our relative interpretation of our experience, our human experience, can be very artful and very intentional and very conscious. And that will instantly make it beautiful. Okay. But if it's not artful and if it's just unconscious and haphazard and we're flailing, well then fine. But you should still know where the off switch is. And you should be able to differentiate yourself from your drama. The drama is not who we are. It's, again, our thoughts and feelings are not who we are. They're how we are. So, but our state of being, if it becomes elegant enough and we return to our original bliss, which is that exquisite state of being, then whether we have situations and circumstances that are pleasant or not around us, we're still in touch with a truth that is so fulfilling and so elevating and so inspiring that we are truly self-reliant in that spiritual sense, and then we can really contribute from that point forward. So one last aspect that I want to just jump in there with, and then I'll get to Rihanna, who has a question pending, is there's 3 different aspects that we come in with, okay? And that are just part of our operating system. And it's so obvious that we tend to run right past it again, which is that nobody needed to teach us how to play. Nobody needed to teach us how to laugh or how to smile. Now, everything else had to be taught. Blowing your nose, going to the toilet, tying your shoes, learning your ABCs. But those aspects didn't need to be taught. So that tells us something. That is our essential human nature, speaks to those aspects. So those are part of the secrets of finding your way forward on the path as well. Rihanna, hello.
Hi,
How
Charley.
you doing? Good to see you.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
It's great to see your smile joining in here with Joy and everybody else on board.
Yeah.
Yeah. How can I help you tonight?
Well, I just want to make a comment first of just about breath work itself, breathing, and how I just love how I'm learning a lot about using the breath in through the nose, hold for a second, and then long out through the mouth.
Yeah.
And
excellent.
What I find when I do that is it really connects me with source. I feel my internal being start to expand, and I have to get this it's like I become multi-galactic in that moment. That's my best words. And so yeah, so I think
that's great. I mean,
about
that's fantastic. Yeah, I'm glad you're resonating with it. And most importantly, you know, that's a way of showing up for yourself.
yeah.
You're connecting with the essential essence of life, and you're in relationship with that precious commodity, you know, so you're in relationship with it. Now that's being, right? You know, that's getting in touch with your beingness. So is there a question behind that though?
Well, yeah, I think you know, since you said what can you help us with, I think the thing I'm struggling the most with is I have this, I think we could all probably relate to this. So this could be for everybody, is we have that inner part of ourselves that understands so much and could see everything that's unfolding and all of that. And just because I tend to, like you, look at the wider perception of reality and not just little micro.
I know there's a question in there somewhere though.
Yes. And so it's more about the lethargy.
Lethargy. Okay.
Like, yeah, it's like, I feel this battle of just that part of, and then the lethargy of just, I don't know. It's
so,
disturbing.
Okay, sure. Yeah. You mean physical, you know, physical fatigue, you know, physical tiredness. Okay. So
physical tiredness, it's just, yeah, it's deeper than that. So.
Okay. Well, I understand where you're going with it, but it's also kind of too broad a theme to bring specifically into certain aspects here in terms of, you know, functional to the message of living from the inside out. But I'll do my best to speak to it for a second, which is that my orientation more and more in life, and I'll be writing about this in our next book that's coming up, is that orientation is to protecting one's drive. Okay, protecting one's drive. And just consider that whole phrase as an incredible potential. Like that, the concept of even recognizing that there is a drive to protect is helpful, because there is a drive to protect. Okay. So we don't have to get very cerebral about this. It's very organic. You have a certain amount of physical energy and a certain amount of energetic energy too, if you will. But most of us are really just kind of focused into the physical, you know, gross matter energy. So consider that as an actionable takeaway. If you just limit a lot of the extraneous, unnecessary thinking patterns, like the constant thinking, especially about that which does not exist, i.e. the future and the past. Not that you can't think about it. It's good to think about it, but I'm just saying incessant thinking. I'm saying thinking that basically is habitual and unconscious. If we were to dial that down and to diminish that aspect, well, the brain is the prime consumer of energy. So if we're the dog chasing its tail, problem solving about things that we're not really problem solving, we're just obsessing, we're just freaking, we're just constantly going from one thought to another, and it's just a cerebral ping pong match. This is back and forth. It's dizzying, it's disorienting to the system. So quieting, if you're able to quiet and to diminish at least a decent percentage of that neurotic quotient, then you will have more physical energy. The other thing I recommend is considering your circadian rhythm. That has a lot to do with the whole ishkabibble, you know, the whole 9 yards of physical health. And again, it's a vast subject, more suited to other people than this particular spiritual teacher. But I borrow it because it's related to human potential. In other words, their circadian rhythm techniques of installing or in training a circadian rhythm have a lot to do with having the intention to have one, like we talked about before, and making an effort to set your body clock. And that can be super helpful. I also recommend that as a way to restore your physical energy, consider that gratitude is a superpower, okay? It's not just like a nicety or kind of a feel-good thing or something that you bring just to the rainbow gathering or something. That's good too, like it's all fair game. I'm just saying that gratitude is something we need to tank up on, not just a little bit, like tank up on it. Because if you're feeling gratitude and you're having that pristine emotion, your cells are going to go into a state of relaxation and ease, and your body is having the sense that it's being well piloted, that somebody's home who loves it, somebody's home who's in love with life. Well, then the body is very, very happy to go about its obligations, just like a horse that really loves its trainer, and it knows that it's like, oh, there's my trainer. And it knows that the trainer is like the highlight of its day because it just wants to be piloted. It wants the trainer to love on it and take care of it. Well, your body's the same way. So protecting your drive starts with some of those basic themes. Yeah, and I think that sure, it's important what we eat, but it's even more important what eats you. So diet is a consideration, but I would also suggest that you have a mindset of celebration with life, a mindset of gratitude, a mindset of curiosity for your life. And just really remember, okay? Because speaking of narrative in our personal drama and story, this is like a mass hypnosis that we feel like, oh, this is how it is. This is how it's going to stay. This is what happened with my life. And it's like, no, wait a minute. It's not over yet. Yeah. So many of us are just kind of jumping ahead like, well, based in past experience, this is kind of what I can expect. And it's like, well, yeah, if you think that way, but you have to consider that you can have a revolution in consciousness and you can have an awakening of consciousness and awakening of potential that's beyond anything you have ever imagined, that bears no relation to the person you were before and bears no relation to your limitations from the past. So if you log on to that kind of potential, in other words, you fall in love with this potentiality that exists within your heart, and you know that there's some vast divinity and some vast miracle that can absolutely illuminate not only your life, but everybody around you and the planet at large. Well, if you activate that invisible sun, you will be stoked and you're going to have a lot more physical energy to work with. And your body will tell you when it's time to rest and repair. And then you just listen to it.
Emily has a question. I don't know if you're seeing that. Her hand is up.
No, I don't. Emily. Okay. Oh, there she is. Okay. Hey, Emily.
Hi there.
Hi.
I was just kind of curious in terms of like the third technique that you were speaking about.
Sure.
I just in terms of, I guess, expanding on that or kind of describing that more so that I feel like I'm fully understanding what that technique is.
Sure. The divergent focus, the omnifocus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So, sure. So the way you want to think of it is you have a certain level of awareness, right? Not just of your thoughts, but you have a certain level of body awareness, right? It's just there. And as soon as I say that, you'll probably start paying attention to your body. So that body awareness is limited to what? The body itself, 3 inches beyond the body, 6 inches beyond the body. Our aura, which is to say our electromagnetic field, extends way beyond the body. And that electrical aspect of the magnetic field is informed and stimulated by your thoughts. And the magnetic portion of the field is stimulated and informed by your feelings. Okay? So that field of energy that is an extension of intelligence from the physical body is all around you, even though you don't see it necessarily, but it is felt, and it is a presence that impacts the world at large. So you can start by being aware of the energy that's around your body. You can close your eyes, relax into your breath, and be aware of that energy that's around your body. And at first, it's very unfamiliar, and it's like trying to find the right word for you guys. Like it's kind of, it may be uninteresting, or it may feel like, what am I supposed to look for? Because we're so conditioned, we're so naturally educated to just conceive of that. If we're looking for something or sensing something, there has to be a subject-object relationship. This is different. This is saying you're feeling and sensing beyond your body as if everything around you is a part of you. Okay? You're sensing, not that you're looking for something in particular, you're just sensing. And sensing is a miraculous phenomenon, because as soon as you're sensing really well, you're feeling and sensing 100%, you won't be in an analytical state. You won't be overthinking the experience. So you're just broadening the awareness first around your body. And then what I was suggesting earlier is you can run with that theme and expand it to the neighborhood, or your yard and the neighborhood, and maybe even beyond. Certainly you can take it as far as you'd like. In mystical transcendent states, people sense way beyond their bodies. But I think we can start with the energy field that's around the body. Now, you can do that with your eyes open and your eyes closed, but it may be most conducive to have your eyes closed when you start practicing that. Okay? Yeah. So it starts to, in my understanding and in my perspective, it starts to create more of a two-way signal. It starts to wake up the chakras, which are the intercom between the soul and the body. It starts to invigorate the energy vortexes of the body, those energy centers we call chakras or chakras, simply because you're focusing on energy and not matter. Okay? And matter is energy. It's just very dense energy that's moving very slowly. So in training yourself to subtle perception is what's happening when you're focusing on when you're commencing rather that omni-focus, when you're doing the work of broadening that focus.
So what's the opposite of that, Charlie, when you're talking about quieting and putting, you're talking about working from the inside out.
Right.
So when you're talking about omni-focus, I mean, that's a huge expansion of awareness. And so then when you're going into the meditation is so multifaceted and complex, but when you're going into this quieting, as you called it, what's the opposite of omni-focus when you're focusing your precious attention in?
Right. The opposite of that?
The opposite of omni-focus. What is the opposite of omni?
Well, I mentioned it. It's the convergent focus.
Okay.
Yeah, the convergent focus, which is like the pinhead focus. Think of it as like, again, it's very typical. It's so, well, in a sense, you're practicing it now. You're focusing on a screen, and it's like all your attention's there, or most of your attention, or at least a portion of your attention is definitely there. So we tend to, especially when we're in the stress response and we're living by what I call the animal gear, which is the stress hormones of cortisol and adrenaline, basically, then our perceptual base is reduced to such a degree, and all of a sudden our vision is truncated, and is basically diminished. So yeah, when you're narrowing in on a very small target, it's usually, especially in a reactionary way, it's based in a response to living from those stress hormones. Now that's the animal gear, are those stress hormones. The angel gear is oxytocin and vasopressin and endothelial-derived relaxant factor, all these different chemicals that are created by opening our hearts and opening our focus. So yeah, the opposite, you experience it all the time in terms of again, like I say, when you hear a loud sound or something surprises you, and it's not just in an emergency mode that we have convergent focus, obviously, but we generally tend to walk around with a very narrow focus. So this omnifocus, this divergent focus, speaking of living from within, from the inside out, it's from a state of being. So you're not focusing on the outside from the outside in. You're focusing on the sense of being first and then panning out your awareness. Oh,
But
thank
so
you, Jennifer.
that would seem like that was it's kind of somewhere in between omni and convergent focus. It's not hyper focused,
Right.
because of a stimulus, but isn't it a thing about quieting and centering and then expanding into omnifocus, right?
Oh, definitely, definitely. At that point, it's meditation, though. See, right now, I want people, at least at the starting point, starting gate, just start with that orientation. You want to play with it and get it. You want to get the information into the operating system in a logical manner, in a logical, rational way.
That's would be neuroplasticity in terms of neurophysiology.
Yeah, well, getting the information and processing it, the effect of that would be neuroplasticity, right? So, but the first thing is having the information before the experience so your body can surrender to the experience of sensing. First, it wants to know why, okay, and what before it gets into that experience of like you want to know, okay, well, why am I here at the nightclub and who's going to be there and what are they serving and is this my type of scene? So you have to have some orientation to your body-mind complex so it can relax into that process of sensing more broadly. Great. So we'll take just one more for you guys. And yeah, great conversation and great questions. Hope that helps, by the way. Does that help, Joy? Yeah.
Very much.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
it's great.
From Kathy to everyone.
Chapter
Thank
5
you, Charlie.
in your book? Is this
Welcome,
chapter
Kathy.
5?
The breath work aspect is the breath strategy that I shared earlier, that second strategy. The protecting the drive and the omnifocus is not in this book yet, but it's going to be in the next one that we're working on.
I love the concept of this. And when Rihanna asked her question about lethargy, was that possibly a form of resistance?
It can be, but I think it's unwise to necessarily deduce that right off the bat, because we start getting tricky if we become too psychoanalytical about it. Let's just take it at face value fundamentally that when we reference lethargy, we're just talking about physical fatigue, and that way we can start with one dimension of human experience and expand it from there. And we don't want to superimpose too many different aspects because then it clouds the horizon. But potentially all kinds of things can happen because we're extremely complex beings. But let's just think about it in terms of physical lethargy and go from there, because that tends to be the more universal baseline challenge for us as people. Great. So I do have time. We'll make time for one more because it feels like there's a little more to go. And if you guys have anything up there that I can share for you. From Jennifer, and thank you, Jennifer, for your comment. That was really sweet. We got some nice feedback here. Diane Rodich with some beautiful souls that are part of my guidance practice. You guys are so sweet. Now it escaped me because I'm on a few different tracks here, but somebody just asked about, would my book be available in an audiobook? I think that was the question, right? Good question, because it keeps circulating through my mind lately on a daily basis that's something that I would really like to do, especially since I think the majority of people these days are not reading so much as listening to books. And I have it in the back of my mind to do that. So we'll see. Hopefully the fates will put that in place. Thanks, Joy. It was great to have you here. Yeah, absolute pleasure. And so we still didn't get to appreciate the question, but anything else I can help you guys with before we finish tonight's Lightline event?
Hi, this is Rayhana. Diane is saying in the chat that she doesn't know how to raise her hand and she wants to raise her hand.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Rihanna, for helping out. Diane, if you just unmute yourself, Diane, you should come up and we can have it in real time.
Okay, does that work? Is that working?
Yeah, there's no video, but I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I can turn my video on. I don't have any heat in my house at the moment because our fuel ran out. So let me.
It's up to you. At least I can hear you, but whatever you're comfortable with. Great to have you on board.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
That's cute. That's great.
Yeah.
I love they got the tooth on it.
I know. I'm just, if I need to rush outside for anything, I'm
cold up
all
there
set.
in Jersey.
Yes.
I know. I'm from there. Yeah. So great. You know, how can I help you?
So my $1 million question is,
okay.
with the intention, sincerity, and focus, and the piece about looking inside to create what you want outside. So if you're thinking you want to have your life go differently, then I guess you look inside and then you try to imagine it that way. Is that correct? And have those feelings? And then do you keep thinking of those feelings throughout the day, even if you're not there yet? Or how, I don't know. Or were you going down a different path?
A little different. Yeah. I think what you're referring to is more of like kind of a manifestation model, right? Is that the way you're looking at it? Okay.
Yeah.
But I think,
guess.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it as far as I can tell. I mean, and that's fine. No, that's fine. But just understand that that's how you're looking at it. You know, the the tool really, all tools really become an extension of those who use it, right? I mean, basically of the artisan, like however you approach the tool is like how you find, in other words, the utility is expressed by the artisan. If what I would say to that, because I don't hear a clear question, we could maybe pull it into a clear path, but what I heard brings me to the aspect of asking you what your intention really is. Like, so the intention with sincerity and focus, what is the intention? You said to have the life different than it is, right?
Yeah.
So that's, okay, so that's more about manifestation. Well, think of it this way. If you get, yes, you like you said, you're going to keep referencing intention and sincerity and focus throughout your day. But here's the thing. If it becomes less mental and it becomes more of a composite of emotion and thought, you'll have greater velocity. You'll have greater amplitude, in other words. Like, because, see, it's sounding very theoretical. It's sounding very like imaginative. Oh, I want my life to be different. And we all know what that feels like. And that's natural. And I think it's good to feel that way. And I want to make that clear. I mean, I feel the same way. Like, how can we better ourselves? How can we create a richer, fuller life and all of that? But what I'm saying is, in terms of living from the inside out, just consider that the first base to cover may be getting more, well, it's not maybe, getting in touch with what you really want, which is that sense of feeling so fulfilled and so blessed and so enriched by being in touch with divinity that from that place you get creative. When you're stoked up with all of that rocket sauce, you get creative with what you're wanting to, with what your intention is and what your focus is, and you apply the sincerity into the mix. Sure, you're going to have a different life. But I think if it's very theoretical and conceptual, it still tends to be subject object. We need to be unified with that which we're really looking for, in a sense. You know, we have to, like, another way to say this is you have to become the thing that you want. And you don't just want a circumstance. You know, we can't become a circumstance necessarily. Like, to become the house with the pool. We're not going to be a house with the pool, but we can feel what it would feel like to be in the environment of the house with the pool and to be identified with it so strongly, right? So I think there are competing thrills, in other words, about what we're wanting and what we're wanting to manifest and create. And it's all fair game, but I just think there's a central desire and there's a central longing in spiritual seekers that supersedes all other desires. And that's why Krishna said to Arjuna, if you seek the union first, establish yourself in the union, then you're going to have the proper wherewithal to create in the world, see? So that's truly an example of living from the inside out. See, what if you gave a 6-year-old like poetic license to do whatever they wanted in their life? They would lack the consciousness to make the proper choices, right? So wouldn't it make sense to be unified with the ultimate intelligence and the ultimate love that is creation? It's not only created creation, it is creation. And it's non-creation, it's everything. There's nothing that it's not. But why not establish a relationship of empowerment with that source and then move from there?
And when you said what you were speaking about wasn't about manifesting, what you just said is what you were talking about.
What I just said was what I was talking about?
Yeah, the point you said, creating that unity with source.
Right.
That's what you were actually speaking of when you brought up the sincerity focus, not manifestation. That's what you
Not necessarily. Yeah, exactly. Not necessarily, because all these different end games, like of fulfilling desires, they're fine. I'm just saying again that that you basically are an answer to which you don't have a question. You're an answer that you don't have a question for. And that's the only question that you don't have. Everything's a question to you, except that answer and experiencing that totality of self that's all fulfilling. And to experience more of that fills in those gaps and informs you about the greatest trajectory that your soul can have in terms of what you're needing to manifest and what's needing to happen in your life. It needs to be informed by the boss. It needs to be informed by the soul and not just the limited information of your experience, your experience that has been informed by your senses and informed by education and culture and conditioning. So it's like there's a prime directive in there to play. There's a prime directive to smile and to be joyful, like we talked about earlier. That's our cue. And that's not the end, that's the beginning. So if you start with a smile, you come into this planet, and yeah, you cry too. But nobody needed to teach you how to smile. Nobody had to teach you how to laugh. And nobody had to teach you to play. Thanks. So take that as the starting point. Like, oh, okay, that's the beginning. Then what's after that? Like, where does that go? So we have intention, sincerity, and focus. We have smile, laughing, and play. There's another alchemical formula there as well. Well, all the best to you guys, and grace and blessings forward. Thanks for being a part of the event, and I hope to see you soon down the line. Take care of yourselves.